Okay, this is on. So very good evening, and thank you, Ari Archives, for allowing me kind of space to hang out on your seashore and put some of my wares out. So thank you very much. And it's a lovely exhibition, and just seeing something that celebrates confluence, fluidity, separate imaginations coming together has been lovely. I'm here. Thank you for a generous introduction. So there is a book that I wrote. It's like a personal memoir, Sumitra and Anees, Tales and Recipes from a Khichdi Family. It's a deeply kind of a personal story of my parents' marriage. They're both dead now, which was, they both come from two different parts of India, sort of North India and South India. They were Hindu and Muslim, and my mother was 8 years older than my father. So they seem to have broken a lot of stereotypes, and that always, I was their only child, and that did dominate my mind. I knew that something was up with my home. This was not just a regular home with same kinds of religions or regions or languages. There's something was up. But it never struck me to kind of make a book out of it, particularly as I was a very personal kind of person, or I thought I was. And as a journalist, I used to believe that I shouldn't draw, I mean, no journalist should draw their biography into stories they tell or reports they write. So this seemed a complete exception to what I claimed to be very private. And my parents were even more super private people. But I think the times that India was going through, when marriage outside communities, a Hindu girl marrying a Muslim boy is something that could get you 10 years in jail for. There are 11 states that have laws for that. So I just thought that there was something here that needed to be told and to be put on the table. There's also now a kind of a drive to rewrite history. It's now it's told very clearly. I'm not kind of breaking news here. Ministers say that they are going to rewrite history. So history is being rewritten. So I thought it was time for like personal stories, memories to also be put out there. And for me also to write history, if not rewrite history, and to put it, put out my little paper boat onto the river or to the sea to have that. But I think what really drove me to really write this book was the election campaign in UP in 2017, the previous UP election, where the Prime Minister, at that time campaigning there very effectively, he's a very popular Prime Minister, he went and spoke of the difference between a Shamshan, which is a Hindu cremation ground, and a Qabristan, which is a Muslim cemetery. And there was something about the previous government being partial to Muslim graveyards. And I had cremated my mother, who is a Hindu. That statement really crossed the line for me, because though India is not new to communal strife and all of this, but you were always told that in the end it's all the same because you go to the same maker, or your origins are the same. All this is, these are just different pathways we choose for the same end. So that distinction coming from somebody holding such high office really affected me. My father, as it happens, died a year after that. So I had to go and bury him in a Muslim graveyard. And then I thought I must tell the world that it actually feels the same. It felt exactly a particular kind of rotten when I cremated my mother, and it felt equally horrible when I buried my father. So I thought that must come out in some way, and their story, their biography, and they weren't there to object. They were even more private people than I am, and genuinely so. So they would have probably hammered me had they been alive. But as they're not around, I took the liberty of their absence to tell the story of their coming together.
So in the title it says recipes of a Khichdi family. So could you tell us about how you've used recipes and Khichdi in the title and why?
So that was another coincidence. My mother was like a working woman. She was an economist, and I was this, she was orphaned very early in life, so she had a particularly hard kind of upbringing as a girl. She had to do, she had to prepare arai and dosa, etc. and all before she was writing her BA final exam. So I was given this kind of princess upbringing as far as kind of domestic chores, etc. went. So I was never taught how to cook or clean, etc. And I was told to sit it out, to sit there, it's okay, somebody else will do it, we'll do it. But mother knew that she was an excellent cook. She knew that I fancy good food. So it was a good idea to kind of just leave behind. She wrote it it's very much a mother writing to a daughter, leaving recipes behind in a notebook. And she wouldn't have minded that published. But she was an exquisite cook, as I said. They kept a very small but hospitable kitchen that they ran. And And it has kind of recipes which are very particular to my father's household and also of her kind of home,
I was going
her
to ask.
maternal home. Yeah, so that's there too. So it was all there. And also as I realized that food is such a horrible contest ground now. I mean, we have problems about who others marry, who they look at, what subjects they study, what food they eat. So I'm not only concerned about whether I'm eating an egg or not, but I'm determined to stop you from eating what you eat. So at this time of grave intrusion into what are settled ideas of sharing, commonality, and just being that in India we had got used to, so I thought food will sit easy with this kind of story of romantic love and just coming together across borders.
How did you excavate the otherwise so-called private from the family and you translated it into the book? And how did you look at that? How did you look at bringing in the private into the text?
Yeah. So I think I ended up using some very elementary journalistic tools. I had started speaking to my father, so I'd done like 4 or 5 long interviews with him to just tell me about stuff. So I didn't do that with my mom. She died some time back. Yeah, it's 2005. But I'd done that with my father after 2014 when this had slowly started, tell me about your life or how those times used to be. So I had that as valuable kind of biographical material, and of course uncles and aunts etc. were there for me to cross-check small facts. But I was also taken to my respective the maternal home and the paternal home alternately every year. LTC, I don't know if you all are old enough to remember those holidays that would happen. So I was taken there for summer vacation. So I had very vivid kind of memories of my father's hometown, Devariya, and my mother's hometown, Mysore. So I was able to kind of mine all that and put it all down.
Bringing in the regional aspect, the south and the north, could you tell us how your childhood was growing up with parents from the north and south of the country?
Well, to be very honest, as I was telling you before this, that the thing that I was most embarrassed about as a child, and I would always edit that detail when I spoke to others, was that my mother was older than my dad. And by 8 years, it struck me as like, did they have to do this? Could they not just not be a regular couple somewhere? So, but then I realized later that that was the least embarrassing of the things. So what I was really, for something that my father could be lynched or jailed, etc., was his wooing a Hindu woman. Was enough for him to be put to jail for. So I think the regional thing was like great play. So I would actually, now that I think back, I would actually think if I was having a North Indian moment or am I in a South Indian mode now? Are the temples in the South better? Why are they far better than what we have in the North? So I think making those journeys and also being acquainted with different languages, which happen very naturally. Whether it was Urdu or Hindi, which I learned when I was there, or Kannada, my mother tongue. So having a passing kind of acquaintance with all of that really helped me become open to even Bangla, for instance, or Malayalam. I don't know it, but I'm curious I like hearing people talk. So I think that kind of opened my head in different ways than perhaps if I was, this is not to say that people who just grow up with one language, they're brilliant and they're very good scholars and all that, but it just kind of opened me generally as a proposition to several things which otherwise I may not have been open to.
In our conversation earlier, you had mentioned about a friend saying how you're half goblin and half pixie. And how did that sort of conversations navigate in your life and how you were able to navigate them?
So the God question does come up in kind of mixed homes, and usually, a lot of film stars in India are married outside their community and they want to like immediately establish this first, that we have a temple in the house and we have a church and we have a mosque. But I was kind of born to kind of parents of very distinctly kind of leftist persuasion, so God, at least till the later years of my mother's life, God did not figure too much. But they made it a point to actually not give me any stuff on God, and that used to annoy me sometimes. And because maybe at a time that you probably want an anchor, you want to be told some certainties, but they would get quite offended when I would ask them as a 14-year-old or as a 13-year-old, and I was told to fend for myself, to figure it out myself. So yeah, I think as a younger person, sometimes I did want the certainty of being in an orthodoxy which would, at least determine some things. But I was kind of let loose, so I was an agnostic for a long time, I think, before I finally left the room on the God question.
The book came out in 2022. How was reflecting on all of this at a much later stage in your life feel? And how was that process of writing for you?
Quite difficult because also because it's like very personal. In fact, I had nightmares about, say, 4 days before the book release in May. I was like suddenly, proper sweat attack. I was like panic attack because should I withdraw, or why am I putting myself out, or also rather why am I hurling my parents' very delicate love story into a cauldron of hate? Am I doing that? So that did kind of worry me, but I had, I think, crossed that Rubicon somewhere when I wrote the book, and it happened over like 2 years. So I had already kind of been there, done that. And also progressively the situation around us politically was becoming worse and worse. And I realized that it is not just a story of love and romance about, Sunita meets Akhtar, Anees meets Sumitra. It was not just that. This whole business of, there are 11 states in India now, by the way, that have these so-called anti-love jihad laws or anti-conversion laws, where you can actually be arrested, put behind bars, fined, and all kinds of things can happen to you because you are wanting to marry outside. So, and in a way, so this, essentially, okay, let me put it this way. Earlier as well, you married out. If I was a girl, a Hindu girl in 1950, 1960, 1970, marrying a Muslim or a Christian, I would get a lot of grief, or vice versa. The Muslims would also give grief. It's not as if, nobody's like totally cool here. But you'd get grief only from family. Maybe the neighbors would say something and say, no, odd kid, is she pregnant? I mean, why is she getting married to him? That kind of thing. But you weren't kind of assailed by the mob, and the state stood by you, or at least pretended to. There is a Special Marriage Act which was passed in 1954, which stood, so the state stood between you and a mob. So to be honest, even when I was getting married under the Special Marriage Act, we got calls, and we were told about, we'll find people for you, and all kinds of crazy things that happen to a lot of people who get married under the Special Marriage Act. But the state kind of stood there as a barrier to contest that. Now it seems as if the state is on the side of the mob. So now I have to fear for my life if I take that kind of a decision. So I think that's a distinct difference that has now come in. So that took away some of my shame, if you like, or hesitation in putting all these very private, personal facts out.
Anything more you'd want to say about the book for the audience?
Well, I think it's like really stupid that I'm not carrying it. So I could have waved it about, and also I'm sorry for not doing it or have read a portion. So that's like complete incompetence. I just clean forgot to bring it. But read it if you can. It's quite short. And maybe it kind of just adds something to, we here at RD Archives, and there's this absolutely wonderful monumental work which is such important leaves of our country, our subcontinent, and our civilization's history, which is often brushed aside as a mongrel tale, as marginal, but it's actually really the centerland. I mean, we're at a place in India now when the hinterland, in political ways and social ways, is holding fort, and it's only going to get bigger and better. Their plans and their ambitions are really big. So I think it's a time when the coastline needs to kind of realize that confluence, this fluidity, and the seas actually constitute much more of the land, and they encircle the hinterland. So I think it's great if we can kind of invert that perspective somehow and actually just tell the story of India as it is. So it's not like a marginal story, etc. It's central to how India was founded, and India is, and the best that India can be. So I just hope that my book somewhere becomes a small part in that larger scrapbook, which I think should be the textbook of our lives and our shared past and futures.
Yeah, bringing it back to the points that from origin narratives and See a Boiling Vessel we are looking at, I think the contested spaces of divinity or multiculturalism from a personal understanding is what your book brings to us. And thank you so much for that. And I hope we can take questions from the audience, if you have.
Should we give them a mic? Thank you.
I was just wondering, having published the book now and sort of put it out into that cauldron, how or if your views about writing in a personal or way, if that's shifted your view on objectivity and journalism.
Yes and no. In a way, yeah, it's out there, so I can't pretend that I'm kind of a bearer of facts where my biography should come in. But I think also we're just actually in just such a cataclysmic kind of mode in India currently. It's all kind of happening, so that I think the journalist, the storyteller, events, everything is becoming more fluid. So I still maintain that, I of course believe that neutrality in a journalist is a myth and it's probably wrong to be neutral. But I hope that I'm still objective to facts. But yeah, I think a deeper recognition that I am telling a story because I'm seeing it in a particular way. So to be able to see that clearly, no doubt, my lenses have been cleaned a bit. Yeah, so I'm able to kind of that very false sense that I'm writing something, it's like an outer body thing, no? That I'm like some robot, some chatbot AI which is writing it. So yeah, I do recognize that more explicitly. But in an ideal sense, I would still not want to, or like a lot of Indians write obituaries, then they bring in their stories. So you wonder, like, is this about yourself or is it about the person who's just died? So that I still try and keep boundaries. But yeah, I think that dam's been broken a bit. There's a lot of spillover.
I do have another question about the cauldron itself.
Please.
Has it, I understand that anxiety that must have come just before the moment the publication went out, and I was just wondering, you spoke about sort of shifting political climate and how that changes. Does that anxiety recur in particular moments? Have you found the public response to be more positive than you would have imagined? What has that kind of experience been like?
Yeah, I think in certain sections it did take me by surprise pleasantly because it had been received. But I think by that same score there was that kind of anger or a desire to silence the publication of such a book by people who probably thought that this is a inconvenient fact in an otherwise very smooth narrative of the love jihad or Muslims multiplying by hundreds because they're marrying non-Muslims in droves, particularly Muslim men. So yeah, it did kind of, some of that was a pleasant surprise. But I think the rest, unfortunately, is playing to form in how things are. And I think the larger story and the place that India finds itself in is quite disturbing, and so at an alarmingly kind of a rapid pace that the new normal, as we like to call it, is pretty abnormal for a plural society which wants to be at peace with itself.
Just a simple question. Not necessarily like responding to the book or the larger context of it, but you playing like some of the important roles as as a journalist, and I was just thinking like there is an extreme distance happening in an Indian context from maybe because of the a lack of education, which is affecting especially in the North Indian states, people are actually not concerned about education as a site. So how do you think that danger, because that's something which is becoming also an evident divide between the South and the North, because the North Indians are not allowed to some extent to kind of articulate or learn a certain history or historic facts in its right spirit, or there is space politically, as you said, the mob is becoming a state. So in those kind of contexts, where it is not possible very much in South. So how do you think that danger of that shifting education and educationlessness is going to change? Just a curiosity. So.
No, I think that's really important, that's at the heart of it, that a democracy eventually will be only as good as bad as the people who want it. So if people don't want it, what do you do about it? And I think that's a really serious question for progressives in North India. And what I think comes out really starkly is something that was hidden in plain sight, and we sort of ignored it, is the high need for social reform which the South saw. So, you create a thirsty populace which is demanding of its people, which wants what it does. I think that skew where the North, that is not the case, is really coming to bite the North, because what do you say in a situation like UP where there's re-election of a state government where all objective variables, whether it's economy or education, are tanking. So I think it's a very difficult and a nasty question that India faces, also because of our demography being the way it is. The median age of Indians being 29. So if this new demography, they're going to be grandparents in like 20 years. So if that's going to be their collective memory, and that's going to be who they will be as drivers of this country, we're looking at a very dangerous state, sort of a very divisive. And so there was a time when I'm sure you too, Riaz, and me also, we used to be so arrogant about South Asia. We used to look at Sri Lanka with this gentle disdain, Pakistan, of course, Bangladesh, Myanmar. We thought, we've left you guys behind. We are the Western democratic liberal model where we're not following a 1930s nationalism. But unfortunately, that whole South Asian strain seems to have caught up with India. So, so I shudder to think of, at Pakistan, is that the future? We used to, keep telling people that, that's you're just so backward. This whole business about being led by a Sunni Muslim imagination and ethnicity, which dominates your idea of who a Pakistani is. But if you're going to go down the same way, where you just change the characters, whether you look at Myanmar, you look at Lanka, or you look at Pakistan or Afghanistan. So I think that we're heading to that if we don't I don't know how it's going to be solved, but I think pretty much like that Abhimanyu's Chakravyuh, we're pretty much in it. Because how do you tell people to want that? So a small example, Kerala, your floods, they were so big and you all were so angry with the government and you demanded that they fix it and they figure it out, etc. Bihar saw the Kosi floods, which were absolutely, they were like biblical levels at that time. But there was just no problem with it. People adjusted to the floods, to the complete dislocation, and they came back. So it just struck me about a population which thinks that, no, listen, we need to fix this. And there is a connection between governance, accountability, natural calamity, people, government. That link is completely gone. So are we looking at a place where a significant section of India is either not wanting that or thinks it is, it's fatalistic. So, I don't want to sound like all those awful British historians, etc., who wrote all this about India, but I wonder if we've not really, what Ambedkar said about the topsoil of a progressive political democracy really not being sufficient to beat the absence of democratic values in your society. So that whole yawning gap between constitutional values and your social accepted norms and values. So that's really beginning to catch up. And that's scary. I don't know how that will go. But the portents right now, if everything continues to jog along as it is, do not look very good.
The conversation on the book, the exhibition, everything becomes a spatial and temporal marker of the history that we are currently sharing. And we're grateful to have you here, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for being here with us. Thank you.